And I'm Kelly Sherwin, the Director of Editorial Strategy. Today, we're joined by Dr. Angel Perez, CEO of the National Association for College Admission Counseling, often referred to as NACAC, and we'll be having a conversation about the current and future state of college admissions, the evolving role of enrollment leadership, and what access means in higher ed today. Dr. Perez is a nationally recognized leader in higher education and a leading voice on college admissions and student access. As CEO of NACAC, he represents more than 28,000 admission and counseling professionals and serves as a key voice in shaping national conversations around enrollment, policy, and access. Before joining NACAC, he held senior leadership roles across higher ed, most recently as Vice President for Enrollment and Student Success at Trinity College. He's also the author of The Hottest Seat on Campus, a roadmap for mastering leadership in college admission, which discusses the realities of admission leadership. Angel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to just pivot just a little bit from where we are because so much of the discussion right now is just dominated by accessibility and affordability. So outside of accessibility and affordability, what are the biggest factors impacting admissions today? And how are they changing what it means to lead in admissions?
I would say top of mind right now is our political climate. Things have evolved so dramatically over the last several years in college admission. It was just a few years ago that we had the Supreme Court case, SFFA, that took away the right for admission officers to use race in college admission. And so recruitment practices are different. Ways that we read applications have evolved. And on top of that, given our new political environment, not just sort of the mandates and executive orders that have been coming out of the federal government, but also if you pay very close attention to what's happening at the state level, there are states who are really getting into the nuances of the admissions process, things that I never thought I would see. And so if you're an admissions officer, and particularly a dean of enrollment responsible for leadership at your institution, you are paying very close attention to what your legislators are doing and the kind of executive orders or laws that are coming out of that. And so everything from legacy admission is being questioned to early decision being questioned to how you can read an application and how you consider diversity. So there is a lot of change. It feels incredibly disruptive at this moment. I feel, really badly for our colleagues what I'm hearing from them directly is they can't seem to plan ahead towards anything because just as they're moving towards a particular direction, a new executive order comes out or their state says they can't do this anymore. Or for example, the federal government is saying we need this massive data set from you by this date. So drop everything you're doing so that you focus on this. So I would say right now, the big concern is how do we quiet some of this noise and move away from so much chaos? Because it does feel like an incredibly chaotic environment. And how do you respond to some of the mandates that are coming out of the federal government? I'll use international students as an example. Data has shown now that we've processed about 35% fewer, international student visas, and that has detrimental effects on the ability for our enrollment colleagues to meet their goals. That is not something that they have control over. And so now they're trying to manage, well, then how do I admit more students? Do I even have that depth in my pool? They may not. And then I know we're not really focused on graduate here, but graduate admissions is in crisis as well, because so many programs are no longer considered quote unquote professional by the federal government, which means that we are now seeing fewer students apply to programs like nursing and business and so on and so forth. That is not only detrimental for the country because we need people in these programs and pipelines, but it's also detrimental for enrollment. So it's pretty tough out there. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The work of enrollment, I call it warrior work now. Just trying to constantly respond to the headwinds coming your way.
Thank you for that, Angel. I know you touched on some challenges and how complex this role is, I wanted to kind of pivot back to your book and ask for some advice. So your book describes the admissions deanship as the hottest seat on campus. And like I said, we talked about a few things about how complex it is. But do you have some strategies of how these leaders can prepare for these challenges and succeed in this role?
Yes, and thanks for asking me that, Kelly, because the reason I wrote this book is when I became NACAC CEO, I started getting a lot of phone calls from deans of admission across the country, and I found one phrase in common that almost every single person would say to me, which is joy is not the word I would use for this job. And it made me incredibly sad because I had a lot of joy in the job, despite the fact that it was an incredibly challenging job. And I write about it in the book. But what I also realized, a lot of people were crashing and burning and leaving the job or getting fired. And what I realized is no one has given this group of talented professionals a roadmap for how to be successful in this role. And I do believe that, you can teach the skills, but the skills are not about like, how do you do financial aid modeling or how do you, look at your econometric system to enroll more students? That stuff usually is taught. It's the things that no one ever talks about. Like, how do you become an astute politician on a campus, right? One day you're out there recruiting students, visiting high schools, reading applications, and the next day you're reporting to the president and the board of trustees and managing faculty who are not happy about your policies. No one teaches you how to manage that. And so becoming an astute politician, learning strategies around how to respond in a crisis, how to become a really strong communicator and storyteller, but also how do you manage yourself? How do you take care of yourself in these roles that, again, are so public? Sometimes a lot of vitriol is coming your way. I certainly had that experience in my role. And if you are not extraordinarily centered and have done some of your own soul searching and inner work, first of all, asking yourself, like, why am I doing this, right? And what's the bigger goal here? You're not going to succeed. So that's why I wrote the book. And I cover some of these topics and many more in it. And I will tell you, that's what's been resonating with people the most. I think it's been resonating that, one, these are teachable skills, but I've gotten a lot of notes from people who said, gosh, this was the book I wish I had read like 15 years ago. When I first started doing this, it would have saved me a lot of pain along the way.
I'm going to kind of add on to that. Before I do, I just want to kind of give a shout out to folks who are listening. A lot of times with these podcasts, you might say, well, I'm not in admissions. This is interesting, but this isn't my world. This is everybody's world. If you're looking to apply for a job at a college or university, you should be doing your due diligence on what's going on with admissions. If you look at a lot of colleges nowadays, so many colleges are tuition dependent. And if tuition dollars are at risk, the whole institution is at risk. There's a lot of institutions out there who aren't tuition dependent quite the same way. Different question, but still just as important. So if you're listening, don't just see this as another department and it's hard to be them. This is something that impacts everybody and is definitely part of evaluating an opportunity as to whether or not you want to go and apply there. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there before we go too far along. But let's just stay on that whole part of leadership qualities. In your writing, in your book, you've emphasized leadership qualities like self-awareness, reflection, and wellness. Great topics. Why are these skills so critical? You kind of touched on it, but dive a little bit deeper. Why are they so critical for admissions leaders in particular? And can you do anything to dispel the rumors that for the 3 days a year that is actually downtime for admissions leaders,
I think it's like
running a conference that is more like a spa than anything else? There's no programming. It's just a whole bunch of recovery time for these folks to just be able to decompress.
Yeah, well, the reason I wrote about it is it was, again, most of the things I do are deeply personal in my lived experience. I throughout my career, and especially as a dean of admission, experienced several episodes of burnout. And I realized that the reason why, I was experiencing this is because I had not spent really time doing what I call inner work, really self-reflection. One, thinking about like, why am I doing this work? What is the higher calling here? But also putting boundaries in my life. These jobs, if you allow them, can take up 24 hours of your day. And, I know thousands of people who are in the profession, and I would say one of the things we have in common is you've got a bunch of really hyper energized overachievers who are extremely passionate. And passion is wonderful, but passionate can also mean that you put so much in that you can't see the forest from the trees. And I want to read this quote from the book. It's not my quote. I quote someone else in the book because this was a quote that I read in a book during one of my own burnout phases. And this is another thing that's resonating with not just admission officers. I would say most of us probably have had this moment. And it's actually by restaurateur David Chang. He wrote a memoir. In his memoir, he writes, recovering alcoholics talk about needing to hit rock bottom before they're able to climb out. The paradox for the workaholic is that rock bottom is the top of whatever profession you are in. And for deans of admission, they are at the top of their game. They have reached the helm of their profession and they give and they give and they give and they give. And they haven't managed to create boundaries, systems. What do I say yes to? What do I say no to? What are the ways that I'm going to take care of myself in order to show up for others? Also, how am I going to manage my own feelings, emotions? I call it self-regulation, emotional regulation, because the job requires a lot of that. It's a job where you get a lot of public criticism. Again, the job is very public. If you do not know how to manage your emotions and separate yourself from the role, I always used to say to my friends, like, that is a job. It is not who I am, right? So when I'm in a faculty meeting and I am being pummeled by the faculty about how angry they are about X issue, and I'm standing on stage in front of 250 people who are not happy with me, I have this exercise where I float above the room, and I've learned these practices to detach myself from taking things personally. These are all teachable skills. They are muscles to be honed and worked. But these are the things I talk about in the book that if you want to succeed in the role, but more importantly, go the long haul and really make the impact you want to make, you have to start with the inner work first.
Thank you so much for that. And I think what's so amazing about your personal story and those leadership qualities, as I mix them together, that it's easiest to see with the presidency at a college or university, particularly in today's day and age,
Yes.
that if you are going to apply to presidency, one of the qualities you need to have is a certain question of yourself as to whether or not you actually really want to do this.
Yes. Why
If you are
do this work? Yeah.
yeah, if you're
And
just
most people don't
excited to
ask
do
themselves that.
yeah, if you're just excited to do it and you're wanting to do it and you're just like, this is all going to be great, you're not quite ready for the position for yourself. That you need to kind of give it more time to, there's a little bit of fear, not necessarily of not doing well, but of what the position does to people. And having your ducks in a row personally to be able to do that is a certain requirement.
One more thing to that,
Sure.
Andy. So it's that 100%. And then it's another thing, which actually I quote her in the book, Marjorie Haas, who's the president of the Council of Independent Colleges. She's
Wonderful.
wonderful. And she's a two-time college president. Something that she wrote, and I quoted her in the book, is most leaders do not ask before they take the job, what is the problem I am being asked to solve? Right. And so I know so many deans of admission who they're just excited to get the job, right? Or they're excited because of the fancy title of the institution. Same thing with presidents. And then they land there and they realize, oh, look at this and look at this problem, look at this problem. So if you are not energized by the problems first of all, you need to figure out what is the problem I'm being asked to solve. hopefully that energizes you, right? That kind of problem deconstruction and tackling that has to energize you. If not, it is only going to drain you, and you're not going to succeed, or you're going to burn out pretty quickly. And so I think those are two huge recipes for success. You have to really be centered in yourself and understand, like, why am I taking on this role? And also, how have I constructed my personal life and my inner work to make sure that I can show up the best way I can for the people that I'm serving, but also for myself? And what is the problem I'm being asked to solve? And am I energized by it?
So well said. I'm going to just kind of finish with a really quick question on this. I could imagine when you're going into this role, the personal experience that you had being a first gen student and the impact that your high school counselor had on you, and just that's powerful. That's a powerful experience. But were you able to put that in check in going into this role, or was that something you had to contend with, of the things you wanted to make sure happened? Because at the end of the day, you get to do some of those things you want to see happen, but
Not only.
you have to deal with those problems that you don't choose.
Thanks again for asking this question, because it's actually even deeper than the question, in the sense that I'm grateful that I got to do a job and am doing a job, because I work on these issues now at a national and global level that impacts the next generation of first generation, low income students, most marginalized students in our society. And when you said put certain things in check, it reminded me of this. I had to grapple with some of the realities, that there were days when I could make extraordinary things happen for that population. And there were days where I was wondering, like, what am I doing here? And the days that I was wondering, what am I doing here, is the days, for example, at the very end of the admissions process, when we inevitably overspent the budget, I would have to take students out, right? And so as we were building the class, it's like, here's our dream class. Oh, we're about $2 million, $3 million over in financial aid. Well, guess who's coming out? The lowest income students, or students who need financial aid, those students who I care so deeply about. But my responsibility, first and foremost, was to the institution. I needed to make sure that the institution had enough revenue, right? Brought in, the right amount of students with the right academic, quality, the faculty we're looking for, so on and so forth. But in order to do that, I oftentimes had to be in conflict with some of my own personal goals and mission of supporting and uplifting the next generation of first gen low income students. So that work is hard, but again, and I write about this in the book, those are the things you have to grapple with and manage. Like, if you're going to be successful in the role, it can't be one particular vision, like, this is the thing that I care about the most. It's here are the ways that I can impact, in some ways, this population, and in other ways, this population, but always being very clear. If you are taking on this role, your number one responsibility is to the institution that you serve. So it's a paradox. Brene Brown talks about living in multiple realities, and I felt like that my entire career. And especially now that I sit in this role, where I still have to make complex decisions every single day, and I'm not always, serving one population over the other. Those are things that we have to grapple with.
Thank you so much, Angel, for kind of explaining the realities and how we need to evaluate these positions. I just want to end kind of on one final good note of why people do this. And I happen to see your video, the good news video posted on LinkedIn. It brought tears to my eyes, I will say. It was, can you just explain a little bit about that for the listeners?
Sure. First of all, shout out to NBC News, who is doing a segment every Saturday called There Is Good News. Because, if you look at the news, you would think there's nothing positive happening. And last Saturday's feature, I was so delighted, was a segment showing students going onto the computer and getting their acceptance notifications across the country at places like UCLA and Morehouse and Harvard and so on and so forth. And I sent it to all of my, to all of my staff, and I put it out there on social media for our members to see, to remember that despite all the challenges, despite all of the things that we are currently facing, one, there's still so much joy. We are still transforming lives. And, the power of post-secondary education is still alive and real. It's still the fastest way up the social mobility ladder. And, I give an opening speech at the NACAC conference every single year. And this past year, because I knew everybody was coming in feeling so heavy about the things that were going on, I reminded them that despite everything, because of them, and I would say because of those of you listening who work in higher education, millions of students are still making their way to higher ed every single year. I think that's incredible given the circumstances. So there is a lot of joy. The challenges are real, but it's also worth every second.
Thank you so much, Angel, for reminding us of the joy. And I think that's a perfect way to end our conversation. I really, really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as we have enjoyed it. And so grateful to have Angel here. If you have any thoughts or comments or questions for us or for Angel, please feel free to email us at podcast@higheredjobs.com or send us a direct message on X @higheredcareers. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again real soon.